Hello, Adolfo from Portainer here. In this video, you will learn how to connect multiple endpoints via the Portainer agent to a single standalone instance of Portainer deployed on Docker. So you will see how to deploy Portainer on Docker running on a machine that I have on my network, and 4 endpoints, a Docker swarm, and 3 Kubernetes clusters. Of those, one is running on my local network, the other one on Azure, and the last one on DigitalOcean. So this is going to be fun. So let's start by deploying Portainer. I like to run things as the root user. It makes my life easier, but that's entirely up to you. You can use sudo if you want. It also depends on the restrictions you might have on your environment, on your machine. You might have to run things via sudo, but it should work. Let's start by creating a volume called portainer_data and deploying Portainer on Docker. This is quite fast, actually. It's not a big image. It's quite small for today's standards. 74 megabytes is actually very small. And there you go. It's up and running. If everything is okay. Oh, sorry. I don't have net stat here. It should be running on port 9000. Mind you, all these commands will be available in the description of the video. And port 9000 is there. That should be hosting my Portainer instance running on this machine. The IP of this machine is 10.51.1.100 if I'm not mistaken. And there you go. We have the first setup of Portainer. It's I like to change the admin name to something else, but that's entirely up to you. Set the password. And here, the default usually is Kubernetes, but we're going to connect this Portainer instance to the Docker environment. Make sure you select Docker environment. And here we have Portainer running on a Docker environment of a machine on my network. I like to group things when it comes to adding endpoints, so it makes things easier. Let's create 2 groups. You can call one local net or local, whatever you want. Tab will be local. Create this group, and the other one I'm going to call remote net with the tag remote. Again, it's just to organize things a little bit better when it comes to adding those endpoints. Now let's get back to our terminal and let's deploy our first agent. Let's deploy an agent on a Kubernetes cluster, and I'm going to start with the one running on my local network. So the IP of this machine running the main node should be that. Yep. And again, I like to run things as root. That's entirely up to you. One thing that's important is that you make sure you're running a alias of kubectl. So there's a trick I do is I add kubectl as an alias from the micro-k8's kubectl subcommand to my bash alias file. With this one-liner, you should be able to add the alias to your bash aliases file, and by running source.bash aliases, you load already that alias onto your current terminal session. There it is. Now again, make sure that if you have already a bash alias file and you don't want to overwrite it, you add 2 of these little nice bigger than signs here. Otherwise, you're going to overwrite your bash alias file and you're going to be very mad at me. Okay, so let's start by deploying our Kubernetes Portainer agent using the NodePort method. That's because it's running on my local network. It's extremely fast, and if everything went well, we should see this agent running already. Let's see. Let's type get kubectl get pods namespace portainer. There you go. It's running, and let's see if it's running the right port. It should be 3778. It's up and running. Let's get back to our Portainer UI and add this endpoint. So let's go to Endpoints, add endpoint. And here the first option you're going to select is the environment type agent. I'm going to call this local Kubernetes cluster. Oops, sorry, cluster IP is 10.51.1.160. In my case, make sure you have written down the IP of your environment properly. And I'm going to add this to the group localnet. Tag local. Okay, add endpoint. Oh, there you go. So I added this endpoint successfully. And here you can configure the Kubernetes features of this cluster. I like to at least add the micro K8's host path, storage, so you can manage the storage, the persistent storage. You might want to enable also the metric server features of this Kubernetes cluster. And here, well, you can optionally deploy the ingress controller and the external load balancer. That's really depends on what you want to do. Let's save the configuration. And okay, look at that. Here we see the hardware representation of our local Kubernetes cluster. 6 CPUs, 6.3 gigabytes of RAM. If I click on it and click on cluster, we have our 3 nodes here up and running nicely and healthy. Okay, so that went well. Let's go to our Docker swarm. Back to our terminal. We're going to go back and forth on the terminal several times. And let's log into the manager Docker swarm machine. And again, turn things as root. Let's clear the screen. And now I'm going to deploy the Portainer agent for my Docker swarm. And there it is. If everything goes well, it should be running on port 1001. There it is. And we're going to add another endpoint. It'll be our Docker swarm. We'll call it local Docker swarm. The IP is 10.51.1.170. Oops. 170.1. Again, it's nice to have things organized. Put it in the proper group. At endpoint. There you go. It worked. Let's go to the endpoint. And you see that Portainer recognizes what type of environment by the agent it's adding as an endpoint. So here it recognizes as a Docker swarm. And you can see that by the icon here. And there you go. My Docker swarm running on my main Docker instance via a Portainer agent. Nice. Here I can manage whatever containers or images I want to add to this Docker swarm. Okay, so now let's spice things a little bit and let's go to Azure. So I have here my Azure environment, and I have a Kubernetes service called portainerEndpointDemo. So again, let's open, and you don't need to use your terminal client. You can use, actually it's preferable to use the Cloud shell that comes with Azure on your Azure portal, so it makes things easier. And we're going to first download the credentials of this environment that's running this Kubernetes cluster. So the resource group is called portainer-endpoint-demo. And the name of the cluster is portainer-endpoint-demo. So I'm downloading the credentials that will be written to the config file so I can manage this cluster environment on Azure via the terminal using the kubectl command. Okay, so it's been added to my config file under .kube. And we're going to add, in this case, the load balancer portainer agent. And let's see. Again, it's a very fast deployment. It's already deployed. Let's make sure it's up and running. It's creating the container. Let's try that once more. Okay, it's up and running. You can close your Cloud shell here. And let's check, because we deployed the load balancer portainer agent, we should have a public IP where we will be able to access this agent by, again, the port 9001. So in order to check which IP Azure deployed for us here, we go to the cluster under the Kubernetes services, and we check here on, let's see, services and ingresses. Here we should see a public IP. There it is, 4088.232.54, port 9001. You can, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You can copy this IP address here, clicking on this little, or just copy it if you may, on a notepad or whatever is easier for you. I'm going to copy it on a text editor that I have open here that you cannot see. Let's just copy this public IP, go to our portainer, again, standalone instance, and add an endpoint. I'm going to add this endpoint, again, as agent. I'm going to call this remote AKS Kubernetes cluster, the public IP, port 9001. I'll group it in the remote tag with the remote tag, and add endpoint, fingers crossed. And there we go, successful. Yeah, in this case, because we're running this on Azure, it is interesting to enable the Nginx ingress controller in order to be able to manage whatever you're going to run on this Kubernetes cluster. And in terms of storage, you can add default or Azure file, any of the two, but then I will leave a link of the Azure documentation that explains each of these storage options so you can determine which one is best for you. Let's see, you might want to allow users to use external load balancer also. Anything missing? Everything's fine. Okay, I'll just enable the Azure file, storage options, save configuration, and again, here we see our remote AKS Kubernetes cluster represented by the proper Kubernetes icon. I see the total hardware of this cluster, 6 CPUs, 21.9, 22 gigabytes of RAM. Oh, that's quite generous. I click on it, click on cluster. I see my nodes up and running, healthy, everything's fine. This was very nice. And finally, we're going to add the DigitalOcean Kubernetes cluster. So here I have a Kubernetes cluster running called portainer-endpoint-demo. First things first, it's important you have the DigitalOcean command line utility already installed on your terminal. There's the instruction on the DigitalOcean fact page and documentation pages that show you how to do that. So I'm not going to show you this here because it might take too long. And it's sudo. I should have kubectl. Let's see if this works. Get nodes command connected to my. Okay, so let me explain this. Here I have 3 nodes running on my DigitalOcean cluster. And this kubectl is the one that you deploy normally via snap. So again, I'm not going to show you how to do this because there's extensive documentation online on how to do it. But if you do everything properly, when you create a Kubernetes cluster on DigitalOcean, you should see the instructions. They're very straightforward. And I'm already connected on this in this session to DigitalOcean, and I can see my nodes here. So let me just make sure that I'm being truthful. See, oh, again, oh, there you go. So see, you can follow these instructions and here install management tools, and you'll see how to install and deploy Kubernetes client, the version, and the DigitalOcean command line tool. And let's check those nodes. Continue to do this later. Okay, so this shows how the configuration file that you have to download enabled in order to access this cluster. Now, instead of this huge string, what you want to do is you want to add the name of your cluster, right? This is important. Otherwise things are going to get slightly difficult to understand. Right. So, let's see those nodes just to make sure. Again, I'm being truthful here. There you go. You can see that they are here running nicely. And for DigitalOcean, I'm going to deploy the load balancer portainer agent, just like we did with the Azure cluster. Everything ran quite nicely and smoothly. Let's make sure, okay, it's already up and running. Now let's go back to our DigitalOcean console under networking and the load balancers option, and you'll see that the portainer agent automatically deployed a load balancer. This doesn't take too long to deploy. We should see this coming up soon. Okay, so our load balancer has been deployed. This is the public IP. Let's copy this IP address, go back to Portainer, and add our last endpoint. And that's going to be here, clicking on home, endpoint, again, stay here with agent. I'm going to call it remote do Kubernetes cluster, paste the IP, the port 1001, keep it under the remote net group and remote tag, add it, and there you go. Again, very nice and easy. Then again, you have to make sure you configure the Kubernetes cluster according to the DigitalOcean environment. I'll just, for the sake of this demonstration, just enable storage, allow users to use external load balancer, and enable the metric server. Let's save this configuration. And here we see our remote DigitalOcean Kubernetes cluster, 6 CPUs, 12.4 gigabytes of RAM. I'm going to click on the endpoint, go to cluster. And there we go. And we can see our nodes here that are running healthy. Okay, so that was quite interesting, but you can see it's very easy to deploy multiple endpoints under one Portainer instance. And you can now manage all these clusters and the Docker swarm, or Docker swarms if you want to add more, under one user interface. So this is a very nice feature of Portainer. I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, we're going to have all the commands in the description of the video, so you can follow the steps accordingly. Thank you very much. Till next time.